Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Economic Development and Workforce Investment. I want to welcome everyone in our audience this morning. If you do have a cell phone, we just ask you please turn that to silence or vibrate as we do our business this morning. We do have a quorum, so Sasha, if you would, please call the roll.
Senator Boswell, Senator Funky Frohmeyer, Senator Gardler, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Howell, here. Senator Mills, here. Senator Storm, Senator Thomas, Senator Wheeler, Senator Wilson, here. Representative Baker, here. Representative Bauman,
present.
Representative Bratcher, here. Representative Callaway, Representative Camuel,
here.
Representative Duval,
here.
Representative Elliott, Representative Gentry, Representative Griffey, here. Representative Huff,
here.
Representative Jackson,
Present.
Representative King,
Present.
Representative Kulkarni,
Present.
Representative Lawrence, Representative Lockett,
Present.
Representative Pratt, here. Representative Sharp, Representative Tackett Lafferty,
Here.
Representative Truitt, Co-Chair Wise,
Present.
Co-Chair Branscombe.
We do have a quorum, duly constituted to do business today. Is there any members have any introductions of anyone that's here visiting? Seeing none, let's first do our approval of our minutes from our August meeting. Do we have a motion to accept? Motion by Representative Jackson. Do I have a second? Representative Lockett. All those in favor accept the minutes do so by saying aye. Motion carries. Thank you all. Let's get right into today's agenda. First on our agenda is the topic of the effects of Kentucky's adult education programs and trains on the labor market outcomes. And we have visiting with us to come to the table from the University of Kentucky, Dr. Michael Clark and Dr. Ken Trotsky. And I'll let both of these gentlemen introduce themselves for the record, please. Gentlemen, there's a microphone in front of you, and there's a button to push. You'll see a green light that'll appear. That means you are ready to go. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chairman Weiss, members of the committee. My name is Mike Clark. I'm an associate professor at the University of Kentucky and director for the Center for Business and Economic Research.
Good morning, Senator, Co-Chair Weiss, and members of the committee. My name is Ken Trotsky. I am the chair of the economics department at the University of Kentucky and a professor there.
Perfect. We welcome you all. We look forward to your presentation, and you may proceed.
Thank you. So we're here to present the results of the study that we've been working on. This study really originates from language that the General Assembly included in their executive branch budget bill in 2022. The language directed the Education and Labor Cabinet to study the effectiveness of Kentucky state-sponsored workforce development programs. It also directed the cabinet to work with our center, which we refer to as CBER for short, to develop the scope and the analysis that we will be discussing today. In working on determining the scope, we look through the various types of workforce development programs that are available here. And as you probably understand, workforce development in Kentucky is a very complex network of various state, local, federal agencies, nonprofits, providers that all work to provide improvements in Kentucky's workforce in terms of skills, training, and so forth. In determining the scope that we need to look at for this study, we decided that based on the language, we should focus on programs that receive at least half of their funds from the state. Most of the workforce development programs that we have out there are actually mostly funded through federal funds. So for this study, we are focusing on those that are getting most of their funds from the state. Working with staff, we identified 3 programs which met this criteria. Adult education, which is housed within the Education and Labor Cabinet. Trains, which has been developed and administered by the Kentucky Community and Technical College System. And Bluegrass State Skills, which is administered by the Cabinet for Economic Development. Now, in looking at these programs, we were able to work with the various agencies that are involved in these and find the type of data that we needed to evaluate some of this. And so for adult ed and trains, we were able to find sufficient data to do some analysis. For Bluegrass State Skills, we were not able to obtain the data that we needed to do in an evaluation, so this study is going to focus on adult ed and trains. I'm going to start off with adult education, and to give you an idea of kind of what's going on here is adult education is probably best known for helping individuals prepare for the GED and take the test. They provide free testing up to a certain amount, I think 2 tests per subject area. But they also provide a number of other types of services, including English language courses, family literacy. They also provide programs within our justice system to help individuals who are incarcerated work on their GEDs. Their primary population that they serve are those in Kentucky who are aged 18, have some type of a basic skill deficiency, have not completed high school, or who are an English language learner. I want to show you first what's going on in terms of enrollment within adult education. We've seen for really a very long time a fairly steady decline in terms of the number of people who are enrolled in adult ed. Now this is all adult ed programs that we're seeing here. And you can see going back all the way to 2009, we've been seeing a reduction in terms of the enrollment. Now, the reason for the enrollment could be varied. A lot of what may be going on here is changes in terms of the economy. During this time period from 2009 to 2019, we were actually seeing the economy grow fairly steadily, slowly but steadily. As the economy improved, wages increased, we may have seen fewer people feeling the need to seek out adult ed to help improve their workforce situation. But you'll also notice in the more recent data that there's been some additional drops. A lot of what has been going on here has to do with the pandemic, the recovery from the pandemic, and you'll recall back in 2021 and really in 2022 as well, we had a very tight labor market. Employers were really struggling to find workers. That was causing wages to go up, and many of the individuals who might have enrolled in adult education might have, again, found that because of the economic situations, they chose not to enroll in adult ed and instead focus on the employment opportunities that were available at that time. Now, the main thing I want you to take from this is that adult education enrollment has been going on, and then here in the past couple of years, we still are seeing the effects of the pandemic and how the market has changed in the subsequent years. For our analysis, what we're basically going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at labor market outcomes for individuals who participated in some form of adult education. We're looking specifically at their employment. How likely were they to be employed, both before and after enrollment? If they were employed, how did their wages change? And whether or not they were receiving unemployment insurance benefits. To do this analysis, we're basically comparing two groups. The first group are those who enrolled in adult ed. When we're comparing them to individuals who we know dropped out of a Kentucky high school. The age group that we are focusing on are those who are 18 to 32, and that's because of data limitations. Well, we have really good data. That data only goes back to 2008, 2010, in terms of identifying individuals who have dropped out of Kentucky high school. So we don't have data on older individuals who have dropped out. So that's a constraint from the data. And what we're basically doing is we're not simply taking these two groups and comparing them. We're doing a statistical analysis that basically gets us to a point where the group we're comparing them to, that is those who have dropped out of high school, are statistically very similar to those who participated in adult ed. They have similar race, ethnicity distributions, they have similar employment and wages prior to enrolling in adult ed. So this gives us a good comparison. Basically, those who dropped out and didn't enroll are serving as our baseline, from which we are comparing the labor market outcomes for those who did participate in adult ed. Now, a note in terms of some limitations that we have really good data here in Kentucky to evaluate a lot of these types of things. However, one of the things that we're missing is co-enrollment. When people enroll in adult ed, they may actually be enrolled in other types of workforce development programs at the same time. You can imagine an individual walking into a career center, sitting down with a counselor that identifies that you've not completed high school, maybe you should consider enrolling in adult ed and working towards your GED. But you may also have other opportunities from other types of service providers, other types of programs in Kentucky that you might also qualify that might benefit you as well. So there is this co-enrollment component of what's going on in adult ed. They may be getting more than just resources to help them prepare for the GED or learn English as a second language. Unfortunately, the data on co-enrollment has not been available at this point. So when we do our analysis, we're going to be talking about this bundle of services that they get. Adult ed is one component of that bundle, but there may be other bundles as well. And because of that lack of data on co-enrollment, we're not able to identify the individual effects of these individual programs. Okay, so in terms of kind of what we found, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this one explaining how to interpret this graph. Here we're focused on females, and again, we're focused on ages 18 to 32. In the graph that's labeled A, employment, on your left-hand side, what you're going to see is two lines. The red line represents the employment rates of those who were not enrolled. The blue line represents the employment rates of those who enrolled in adult education. And what we're doing is we're looking at 8 quarters or 2 years prior to them enrolling. And you can see when basically 0 is the point at which they enroll. And what you can see in the 2 years prior to that is these groups had very similar employment rates. After these individuals enrolled in adult ed, we start to see that those who enrolled in adult ed, their employment started to improve. If you look on the right-hand side, what you're seeing is a difference between those two lines. So in quarters -8, that is 2 years ago before enrolling, there really wasn't much of a difference between the employment rates in these two groups. After enrolling, employment increased substantially, about 12 percentage points. But you'll notice that that decline, or excuse me, that employment effect started to decline over time. If we look 16 quarters past initial enrollment, it's still there, but it's been steadily declining and it's eroded down to about 7 percentage points. So again, we are seeing improvements from this participation in adult ed and the various programs that come along with that. When we look at wages for those who are employed, again, prior to enrollment, they have very similar wages as those who did not enroll. And you'll notice that when they enroll, their wages actually go down a bit. This is a fairly common result that we see in the research literature. They're focusing maybe on studying, preparing for the GED, studying classes for learning English, or various other types of efforts put towards improving their education. So they're working fewer hours. At some point, we start to see fairly quickly, actually, that wages start to improve, and they improve gradually but steadily, and that effect does not seem to be declining during this time period. We see that 16 quarters after enrollment, they're earning about $336 more per quarter than those who did not enroll. Now, we are not going to show you results for unemployment insurance, whether they received unemployment insurance, because we found no differences. Across all the different cohorts that we looked at, the different demographic groups, racial, ethnicity, gender differences, we basically found no differences in terms of an increase in terms of unemployment, utilization of unemployment benefits. For males, we see the same type of effect. Employment improves, but when we see that start to decay, and we see that decay more quickly than we do for females. One of the other things that we noticed is we did this by different racial and ethnicity groups. We actually found that for black men, that decay was fairly fast. And by about 14 to 16 quarters, the difference between those who enrolled and those who didn't had pretty much eroded. Same thing in terms of looking at the wages for male. Again, we're seeing an initial decline, but then that tends to increase fairly steadily over the subsequent years. Now, we're following this out about 4 years after they enroll. And so what we want to do is show you how much the additional earnings were per participant. So that's what this chart is showing you, and it's showing you for different groups, but I really want to focus primarily on those for all adult ed enrollees. Females and males, they're on the first part of that chart. And what you see is that if we look at the total earnings, both from the fact that we have more people working and higher wages over this 4-year period after enrollment, that totals about $5,300 for women. For men, it's about $6,700 over that 4-year period. Now, I mentioned that enrollment had been declining over this time period. And when we look at these additional earnings, what we want to do is provide you with some context. Is how does this compare to the cost of providing adult education? So here what we're doing is we're showing you the expenditures per instructional hour. And you'll notice this big jump in 2021. There's a couple of reasons for why we're seeing that jump. One has to do with enrollment, and one has to do with the expenditures that are occurring here. Enrollment has been going down, as we saw. Expenditures have been going down as well, but at a much slower pace than what we're seeing. And so as a result of that, even prior to the pandemic, we were seeing cost per instructional hour, or you could also look at cost per enrollee, had been increasing. In 2021, where we saw a large decrease in the number of people who were participating, the expenditures per instructional hour increased substantially. Now, we want to be able to compare these additional earnings to the cost of providing adult education. But we're kind of in a place where it's kind of hard for us to know exactly what is the best comparison to make. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically look at what if 2019 is the cost that's going to be more representative of what we're going to see as we start seeing more people come back into adult ed. But we're also going to look at the 2022 in case maybe that's a more realistic idea of what the cost might be going forward. So in this table, we're just presenting that. The first row of numbers is just the same thing that I showed you in the previous slide. These are the additional incomes that these individuals earned on average by participating in adult ed. Here we see the 2019 cost of providing the average person with an adult education. In 2019, 2022, those numbers are quite different. But if we're comparing the cost to, or excuse me, the additional income to the cost in 2019, you can see that the additional income is quite large relative to those costs. If we compare that to 2022, we start to see that they're pretty similar. In terms of what's going to happen to costs going forward per individual, it's difficult to say. It really depends on what we're going to see in terms of the actual enrollment that we're going to have over the next few years. A couple of caveats is to keep in mind that when we look at these additional wages, we are only counting 4 years of income. As you saw from those graphs that I showed you earlier, some of those effects in terms of employment might be declining, but it's likely that there still are some additional benefits beyond the 4 years. Wages improvement that we saw actually seem to be fairly stable. So again, what we're seeing here is just a portion of those benefits. In terms of the cost, these are only the cost for adult education. And as I noted, there is a lot of co-enrollment going on. One of the things that may be happening here is that these individuals may be participating in other programs, incurring other costs but are getting the benefits of those programs as well. So what we're seeing here only includes those costs for adult ed. There may be other costs that we're not counting in this comparison. The main conclusions in terms of adult ed is that what we're seeing is that those who enroll in adult education tend to see higher rates of employment, higher wages, but the employment effects seem to decay over time, and the rate of decay really depends on gender and race and ethnicity. The other takeaway from this is that adult education enrollees receive other services. And as a result of that, we can't simply say that this is due to adult ed. These impacts are really reflecting this bundle of services, and we cannot say which or what combination of these services contribute to these improvements that we're seeing. Now, this is particularly important because when we go back and we look at the research literature on this, particularly the research literature for GEDs, a lot of studies in the past have basically found that across the general population, earning a GED does not seem to improve education. So while earning a GED does not seem to improve labor market outcomes. My apologies for that. Sometimes I do that in class. I get the same stares from my students. So my apologies. So the issue here is, as a bundle, we are seeing improvements in labor market outcomes, but we can't identify which of these various components or to what extent these various components are contributing to these differences that we're seeing. Okay.
Dr. Clark, I'm going to stop real quick
Absolutely.
before you
Go
get
ahead.
into trains, because we do have a member that does have a question, so we can divide it if there's any members that have questions specifically about the adult education that you mentioned there. One of the questions I had, and you may not have this data or information, of the trend there that you were showing with adult education, as it declined as we got closer to 2019 down to 2020, the pandemic time. Did you look at the funding that the General Assembly was providing over those years to adult education programs to know if we had sustained the same level of funding, if there had been increases or decreases over that amount of time?
In terms of the funding level was fairly constant. It had declined a little bit and then it had come back in recent years. It is reported in the report, so it is documented. The issue, though, is that while the level of funding was similar over 10 years or so, it doesn't have the same purchasing power, because if you adjust for inflation, what you tend to see is that the what we call the real inflation adjusted appropriation was declining over that time period.
Good. Thank you, sir.
But it was declining at a slower rate than enrollment.
Fantastic. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all so much for this important and interesting information. May we go back to slides 7, 8, 9, and 10, please? The reason I'm interested in these slides, I appreciate the date stamps that are included as what time frame you are looking at, but I don't see years included in, say, 7 and 9, that difference in employment where that drastic drop happens.
Are we referring to this area here? Or are you referring to 2007, 2009?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't see a date
actually,
associated with this anywhere on the slide. So
Right, because what we're doing is we're looking at data that actually starts back in 2014 and 2020 and runs through 2022, I believe. And so what's happening is people are entering the adult ed system at different points in time. So some of these may start in 2014, some of these individuals may start in 2019, and some may start in 2022.
So that drastic drop has no bearing on
not,
what year it was.
Correct.
We tend to see that just as an average overall after that many quarters, that drastic drop happens.
Correct.
Regardless of COVID stopping the world and causing
Yes.
havoc everywhere. That is not a direct influence on that drop.
Yes, this is not an issue of anything that was going on concurrently
Any
during
one
that
thing.
time period.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
And just to clarify a little bit more what Mike said, it's also, this is a drop compared to other people who did not receive treatment but are working in the labor force at the same point of time. So presumably if there's a COVID effect or an unemployment effect, it affects both groups equally. What we are saying is we see relative to the people who did not receive treatment, there's a jump in employment for those who did, and then again, 16 quarters later, relative to those who didn't receive treatment, there has been a decline in the differences in employment. So any sort of macro effects of turn down in the increase in unemployment should affect those two groups equally.
Okay.
So it's just the difference between the two of them.
Very
So
good.
that's
So regardless of what's
Yep.
happening in the world, we see that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And one of the things that we did is because COVID has just affected everything, and we're still feeling some of the repercussions associated with the pandemic. We did the analysis as well, only running it through 2019, and the effects were essentially the same.
Senator Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple, if that's okay.
Proceed.
Thank you for your presentation. As we've gotten into this over the last few years, I've just been at this 4 years, and it seems like all of these different areas are like 15th century Italy, and we have a bunch of coexisting nation states that sometimes overlap for a common benefit. And my question is about two parts based on benefits of coordinating and streamlining some of these services. It seems like we have different services that do roughly the same thing, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of interrelation between them. So my question's, could we benefit some from streamlining all of this process with all of these different groups, coordinating them? One of my concerns is that the people are trying to do this going back to school. I've taught adjunct, and before, my non-traditional students were always better students than my traditional students, but they had the demands of jobs and families that they had to manage as well. Do we put too much unnecessary time demands on our people going through this by not coordinating and streamlining some of these different groups?
I mean, that really is more of an administrative issue. and we didn't look specifically at administrative issues. My general sense is that I believe we've made some progress in that regard. We do tend to have these one-stop career centers where they work with counselors, and the counselors are aware of the various resources that are available and can help tailor a particular program or services to the needs of the individual. But we not go through and explicitly look at that issue.
Maybe I could help. I have written other papers, not just this report. In particular, a recent paper I wrote for the American Enterprise Institute and Harvard University Future of Work program, in which we examined aspects of just that. And one of the things that the more recent federal laws regarding job training is pushes us towards what the one-stop center. I will say in Kentucky we've not adopted the one-stop center and those coordinations. There are a lot of reasons why. The legislation could use clarity on who's responsible for organizing and funding those. So the responsible entity is not always well identified. But I would say in Kentucky we tend to lag behind typical other states in trying to get the more streamlined services. So to answer your question, based on other work that I've done professionally, I would say, yeah, we would benefit from it because it is sometimes people have referred to the federal job training program as Byzantine, and I think that's a fair assessment. And we could do better job at all levels, but I think that would be something that certainly we would benefit in the
Wouldn't
state.
be the first time we needed additional help figuring out federal funding.
Yes.
And program structure, would it?
No.
You had mentioned on page 2, slide 2, about the Bluegrass State Skills Corporation, about there not being data available. Is that enough data available for your study? Was that because they just don't have the data, or they weren't very forthcoming with the data?
I think the issue there is when we're looking at labor market outcomes, we need to be able to identify the businesses that are receiving the funds from Bluegrass State Skills for their training and match that to the actual employers. Or you match it to the employers and then match it back to their actual employees. To do that, we would need federal ID numbers. I think the cabinet felt that providing that information would be problematic due to the sensitive nature of those ID numbers. But without that information, it's not possible to look at the labor market outcomes associated with the program.
Can I have a couple more, Mr.
Please
Chairman?
proceed.
On slide 4, you were talking about the drop in adult education enrollment, tight labor market, reduce the need. Is that just a hypothesis, or were you able to see some things, some feedback from users of these services that validated that? It makes perfect sense. I just wondered how deep that you were able to go down into that.
We didn't go real deep into testing this, but there's a lot of economic theory that would suggest that when employment is good, when wages are going up, that improves what working looks like relative to going and earning a GED. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a story that's makes sense in terms of theory. It's consistent with what we're seeing, but we didn't take that beyond that point.
On slide 13, on your main conclusions, you were talking about the employment effect decays over time. Does that mean that people that go and do these services and they do well for a period of time and then they fall out of the labor market? Is that what you were talking about with the impact decays over time, or does their wages don't keep up?
It has to do with the employment. So for example, if you look at males, what we tend to see is, we've got this red line is showing individuals who did not enroll in adult ed. Very similar to those who did enroll in adult ed prior to them enrolling. And so what we're seeing, for example, is those who enrolled in adult ed fairly quickly were much more likely to be employed than those who did not enroll in adult education. About a 14, in the case of males, about a 15 percentage point difference. That gain that we see is declining over time. And by 16 quarters, they're still doing better in terms of employment. They're more likely to have a job, but that advantage has declined or decayed over time. And so, the general trend that we're seeing here is that, at some point in the future, we would expect that effect in terms of employment to disappear.
Is that measured on earnings or just the
No,
fact
it's just,
that they're
do you
in
have
the
a job?
It's just a participation issue.
And just sort of, again, drawing on the larger research literature, this is not this is a fairly common finding that we see. And one of the things that, in terms of a lot of these programs, the programs often help you get a job. Sometimes they're not as helpful about keeping a job, but then again, and for a lot of the people who are receiving these treatment, they have churning in the job market. They lose their jobs at a higher rate than some other folks. It's finding that's the next job after you've lost the first one, where a lot of times these programs don't show the same impact. So what's happening suggests that they lose their job and then they look like the other people who didn't receive training.
Last question, Mr. Chairman, please.
Please.
Following up on that, that was kind of where I was going with the end of this. Getting a next job that's a similar job, but is there any data out there that you've seen where it establishes a baseline of being able to hold the job, so maybe then we can move to a better job, maybe later on in their work career? Or do the people that come through these services tend to flatline in their area of employment?
So again, back to we did not look at that in this study. So let me be
Sure,
clear.
it didn't seem to be.
We did not look at that. Again, other research does suggest that it's exactly right, that the impacts of these programs are tend to be 4 years is a good time period, but they do tend to the skills to get in this occupation, not necessarily moving up a ladder and to continue to move up. And so that's always been nationwide, worldwide, I think, in these job training programs, is providing the skills that would allow them to continue to advance up. That's a much harder task. So
sustainability is our next trick.
Yes. Well, and of course the incentives, you're evaluated on employment 3, 6, and 9 months afterwards. That's what the federal evaluation is for many job training programs, and so they're very much focused on hitting those evaluations, as they should be, because that's what they're being evaluated on 3, 6, and 9 months, and so that is part of the issue as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, you've taken Senator Howell back to his days of an economics class at Swanee this morning, so I just want to thank you all for this. I'm going to move away from Senator Howell. Representative Bratcher.
Yes, thanks for your information. Appreciate some of the good slides you have up here. But one of the questions that I had was, did your information, your data, take into account that a lot of employers now aren't requiring a GED or high school diploma? Is that, where is that indicated in some of your slides?
So we didn't explicitly look at that, but I mean, that's likely, the story that we're telling really in terms of the enrollment rates is that as employers are finding they have a very tight labor market, mm-hmm. They can't find workers. They're looking at individuals that maybe in the past they wouldn't have looked at, individuals who maybe had a background in the justice system, individuals who maybe have less formal training. And so, some employers are starting to look at individuals who do not have a GED. That creates employment opportunities for those individuals. And so, when they're sitting there looking at, okay, well, how do I improve my situation? They're seeing that, work is a good option, and maybe I don't necessarily need to go back and complete my GED. Now, that changes through the economic cycle, of course.
And just one couple other things is that evaluating the GED program or looking into this, did you have a chance to look at whether language was a barrier into somebody getting a GED? Such as a Spanish-speaking person that didn't know English?
We didn't explicitly look at that, but we do have individuals who have come into adult education who are English language learners. That is part of the services that adult education provides. And we think that a lot of the impact that we're seeing in terms of these employment effects and wage effects may be coming directly from that.
So can I add a little too? I think, and Mike has emphasized this, and I guess I want to emphasize it again, we didn't actually evaluate the GED program per se. We evaluated all of those adult education things. So we do not look explicitly at if you got a GED, what's your employment outcomes in this project. I've done it in other papers, but not on this project. So we don't know whether, for example, most of the benefit is coming from the GED or is it coming from those English language courses that many of the people are taking. You saw that some of the biggest returns are for Hispanic people who are identified as Hispanic. So weren't able to sort of parse this program from that program to sort of say what exactly it is that's providing these benefits.
Appreciate that. And then just one other comment is, it's my understanding with some of the research I've seen is that the GED, people who go through the GED program are outperforming high school students on are you aware of that?
You might cut out.
You might cut out for a second.
I'm sorry. It's my understanding that some of the people that go through the GED program, that their requirements are higher than, and their testing performance is higher and at a better standard level than what we see with high school graduates. Is that correct?
The existing research that I'm aware of, including the research that I've done, suggests that's not the case in terms of maybe knowledge about performance on these tests. But if you look at employment outcomes, whether it's earnings and employment, I would say the existing research that has studied the GED program suggests that the GED people do not outperform high school graduates. There is a fair amount of research that actually they don't outperform other high school dropouts either. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But again, that's not what we looked at in this. I'm just drawing at the broader research that has been done in this area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Last question on this session, Senator Funky Fromeyer.
Thank you. There's so many factors that you're trying to identify and help us come to maybe some better conclusions. So when I look at slide 5 and it indicates that we're looking at folks between the age of 18 and 32, but the receipt of unemployment insurance benefits, and then we've also had testimony that you may lose certain benefits the more successful you are in your earnings. So are we maybe recognizing that people are fearing losing certain benefits since they're already experiencing them in order to be factored into your study here? Can you guide us through potential correlation or perhaps a serious issue that we maybe need to reflect more deeply on?
Sure. I think part of the issue you're describing here is what is often being discussed as the benefits cliff. The idea is that as your earnings start to increase, you may not qualify for certain benefits, and that may cause individuals who are close to that cliff to maybe hold back in terms of labor force participation or working more hours or things of that nature. Again, this is not something that we looked at in this particular case. We did not have access to whether they were on Medicaid or receiving TANF or anything like that. So we have not specifically addressed that. How significant of an incentive that is has been debated because while it's often described as a benefits cliff, because of the staggering of the different programs and different program requirements, it's often not really a cliff across all the different programs that are available. It's more like an incremental stepping. This time I might lose this particular benefit. Next time, as my income goes up, I might lose another benefit. So it tends to be a bit more gradual, is my understanding. But it's not something that we explicitly looked at here. It is a good point because it can potentially provide a disincentive. In terms of the unemployment insurance, we didn't find an effect. Now, remember, unemployment insurance is different than many of the other types of benefits that you might be talking about that are more focused on needs towards low-income individuals. But for receipt of unemployment insurance benefits, I initially went into this thinking, well, I mean, this should reduce their usage of unemployment insurance. They'll be more likely to be employed, less likely to file for a claim, and so we should see a decrease there. What I started to realize, though, is that many of these individuals were actually probably not qualifying for unemployment insurance because of their past work history. If you lose a job, you have to have had a sufficient work history over the past 5 quarters to qualify for unemployment benefits. What UI is doing is it's improving their employment, and it may have a positive effect in terms of utilization because now they're employed. When they do lose their job, they have the work requirements to be able to qualify for those benefits. So we have a positive impact in terms of they may be more likely to use the unemployment insurance benefits because they're working more, but they also offsetting that because they're working more in the future, they may not need unemployment benefits. They may not lose their job as much. So in that particular case, it was kind of a mix of different types of effects. And Ken, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Okay.
That would Mike did a nice job of capturing it.
Gentlemen, I think we're ready for the next portion of the presentation.
Okay. All right, so Trains was established in 1999 by the Kentucky Community Technical College System. And basically what happens here is the technical and community colleges will work through, or will basically develop customized training programs for eligible companies. Now, this consists of two different types of courses, just to be a little overgeneralizing. We have 4-credit courses where individuals who are participating in the training are actually receiving credit for the classes that they're taking. And these are often very similar to the classes that you would take if you just signed up for one of these colleges. They also have not-for-credit courses, which can be a day long, multiple days, where they maybe go out to an employer and provide specific types of training. This can be in a number of different areas, like how to use protective equipment, how to use spreadsheets, things of that nature. Now, the funding for approved projects goes like this. Basically, companies have to put some money into this. They pay 25% of the training cost, plus they have to pay a 10% administrative fee to the colleges that are developing the training for them. The colleges are then reimbursed for the remaining 75% from KCTCS, and this is funded through an appropriation that the General Assembly provides. And and I think in the current budget, I believe it's $4.1 million per fiscal year. Trains is basically what we refer to as a sectoral training program. And what's different about these is that they have significant involvement from the employers in developing the training. So it tends to be more focused on the needs that the employers are actually having. They also generally tend to try to connect low-skilled workers to industries, particularly industries that are finding certain types of positions very hard to fill. Oftentimes, they'll include job search assistance, career counseling, and other types of services in addition to the actual training it provides. The research generally tends to find positive effects for these sectoral training programs, both in terms of improved wages and improved employment. And typically, these are evaluating the effects 2 years after participating in these programs. Our methodology here is very similar. What's going to be a little bit different here is our comparison groups. We are looking at individuals who participated in the 4-credit enrollment. We are not looking at those in the not-for-credit classes because the way those are set up, while sometimes we are able to identify the individuals who take those classes, oftentimes we are not. For the 4-credit enrollment, though, we know who is participating in those classes, and we can link them to their employment records. We also looked at their coworkers who did not enroll. So these are the two comparison groups. We're going to look at those who enrolled in 4-credit courses and compare their labor market outcomes to individuals who did not enroll but were at the same employer. We're going to look at individuals who are in our prime labor force participation years of 25 to 54. The results, we see kind of similar types of things. Here what we're seeing is employment. And a couple of things that are different here is initially at quarter zero, this is where the enrollment occurs. Everybody is employed here. By definition, you have to be employed to be participating in these types of programs. If you look in the 8 quarters prior to this is for women, we see that the individuals who eventually enrolled in trains had lower employment rates than those who did not enroll. When we look at the employment rates after enrollment, what we see is that those who enrolled were more likely to be employed. At 16 quarters after enrollment, it's about 50 points higher for those who enrolled. In terms of wages, we did not observe much of really any difference in terms of the wages. Those who did enroll were earning more prior to enrollment. And that difference was basically maintained throughout the time period that we looked at. For men, we see kind of similar types of effects. After enrollment, their employment improved. But when we look at 16 quarters out, we start to see that they tend to fall back down very similar to their coworkers. And no impact in terms of wages. Now, the fact that we're seeing pretty large increases in terms of employment suggests that there is additional earnings occurring here over the 4 years that we evaluated. Here I'm basically showing you the present value of the additional income earned over those 4 years per participant. And we look at all individuals, all females, the additional income was about $17,000. For males, it was about $11,000. And we've got a couple of different estimates in the report. This is our lower estimate. So in terms of our conclusions for trains, we basically found that there did seem to be an increase in terms of employment. For women at 16 quarters after enrollment, those who enrolled were employed, had employment rates of about 80%. Those who did not enroll, employment rates were about 65%. For males, prior to enrollment, they weren't as likely to be employed. 16 quarters after, they were as likely to be employed, but there was no big difference really in terms of, at 16 quarters, they were basically similar to their coworkers. And wages did not improve. One limitation we have in this part of our analysis is that we weren't able to get the comparison groups to be as similar as we would have liked them to be. Basically, prior to entering in trains, enrollees tended to have lower employment levels than non-enrollees. This may be the fact that a lot of these individuals may be new workers that the firm has recruited, and this may be affecting our results. So we look at these employment differences. It may be partially due to trains, but it may also be to the fact that we seem to have a lot of new workers enrolling in trains and being selected for these particular types of jobs. That concludes my comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I want to thank both of you gentlemen for the amount of time you put into this research on behalf of the General Assembly, because I know this was charged to you all in 2022 to do, and it's greatly, greatly appreciated. We do have a couple of questions. Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Clark and Dr. Trotsky for your work in this area. You know, as a legislative body, we get a lot of good presentations, and as an old educator, I love that. But now, I guess the million-dollar question is, what do we do with it? So my question would be, what would be your number one recommendation? Would it be to move money from adult ed to trains? Would it be, what do we do with this since you did all this work on this? Now, what would you recommend that we do with this as a legislative body?
I think that's a fair question. So I think one is that because we weren't able to separate the individual effects of these different programs, I would be hesitant to recommend taking money from one area to the other. I think, and this is something that Ken and I talked about just earlier this week, and Ken may want to elaborate on this, is what are we seeing in terms of the research literature, particularly in terms of GED? And Ken, you want to? So
I will say a couple of things. The literature on these programs like trains, and it's a much newer program, what we've called sectoral training programs, and this is even more directed because it's, trains is at a firm level. So it's not surprising. These people already have a job. They've been hired by a firm, a business, and the business wants to train them. So it's not surprising that they keep them along because they're probably choosing the ones that they think they're going to stick around. So I think but I think it's very positive. I mean, I think it offers a benefit. The other thing to keep in mind is the people that are in the trains program look different than the people that are in adult ed. They are much more advantaged. They're much less likely to be single moms, returning addicts, things like that. So people who are in the are in the adult education programs tend to be the much harder to serve population. Having said all that, do I think can you think about ways to direct it? The trains program is pretty successful. I think there are clearly aspects of the adult education program that seem to be successful. It'd be useful to evaluate them and to better know how to target those monies there. Again, the literature on GED suggests that the GED is successful, but for a pretty targeted population, not the typical person that's receiving the GED. That's the other literature. So, I mean, one thing I think this. So I think there's some things to draw away from it. These sectoral programs do tend to be successful and produce benefits above the cost that they are to implement them. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I think it'd be useful to know more about what's going on in adult education and literature. And I think more generally, it is useful to have an ongoing evaluation of all of these programs to make sure that they're done correctly. I know this was a one-off program, and I think it's great, but having an implementation of evaluation culture in all of these agencies to continue to assess the success of their programs, that would be something that I would certainly advocate for. I worked on programs that have moved that to be what's going on in the federal government with the 2018 Evidence Act. I think we would benefit from continuing to look at these programs and figure out exactly the answer to your question. What do we do now? Because this is the first time, and I think we would like some more information about a lot of these programs before advocating for moving monies around.
And before we move on, we focus on trains. Trains does seem to be really promising. And when you look at the research literature, you do see kind of a wide variety of effects. And one of the reasons we may see these effects is, and why they differ across different programs in different states, has to do with their ability to identify these industries that have real needs, shortage of workers, and the ability of something like trains to be able to actually fill that gap. That can be a really difficult thing to identify and put resources into prior to those needs, or even to respond in real time. And so one of the reasons we might see these differences across states is some states have maybe gotten lucky, or maybe it was by skill or design, in terms of they were able to identify where a real employer need was, have the resources in place, the training programs in place to be able to meet that need. Those may have done particularly well. If they weren't able to identify those up front and relatively early, they might have struggled to be able to have training programs that really had a meaningful impact in terms of labor market outcomes. And Ken mentioned the GED and the kind of where the broad research literature is. If you look at the general population, that's right. We don't see much of an effect across the broad population for GED. But what we do see is in certain populations, the GED seems to be really, really important. There's been some research done in the area of GEDs in the Justice Cabinet. Not so much our Justice Cabinet, but in the justice programs across the U.S. That seems to be a place where maybe the GED is really, really beneficial in helping those individuals who are coming out of the justice system reintegrate into society and find work.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Members, also this 110-page study and report will be posted on our committee website just in case members want research and look into this or any reading material. So we did not print that off for each individual member. Also, we are approaching the 1 hour mark. We have a couple members still with questions, so I just ask you to please keep this concise and the train running. Representative Kulkarni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You actually answered my first question, so we can move on very quickly to my next one. Thank you all for this very comprehensive information. I, of course, as a layperson, have jumped to all kinds of conclusions because I'm not a data analyst. But I did have a question about the sustainability of the effects. So we've seen that, after about 16 quarters, differences in wages, differences in employment basically went down to nothing. I'm concerned about that because what that tells me is that we're putting money and support behind programs that are having an impact in the short term. And so my question, I guess, is for you all, how incomplete would you call this if we are not able to get some of that data that you mentioned with regard to, are there underlying factors? Is this a soft skills issue? Is this an accommodation gap with employers? Is it a job-specific skills gap that you're finding with these employees? What data do you need to complete that picture for us so we can come up with some policy responses as needed? And then what would you say is the biggest factor in that sustainability drop-off?
You look to be anxious to.
Oh, no, well, I'm happy. Okay, I will go. Thank you, Mike. A couple of things. I think it would be useful to have data on these individual programs to identify which of these programs are most beneficial. I think the other thing to keep in mind, particularly for the adult education program, is many of these are a very at-need population. They do not have a lot of resources. So while we see some of these changes in earnings, in a very real way, they're probably more meaningful for that group because they don't have high earnings to start with. So 4 years of higher earnings can have a significant impact for these individuals. Again, because they are often at need, population who struggle to find a job for an extended period of time, they're more costly to treat, they're more costly to find, and it's just harder to find those programs that could help them get improve sustained employment. I think it would be useful to understand more about exactly what training, even within the training programs, what types of training they are being served in. Are they being sent back to school, and is that more effective than just sort of efforts to learn how to write a resume and conduct a better interview? Is it some of these programs provide transportation? Is that an important thing? We don't know the answers to those questions, and so I do think it would be useful to your point, to have better data and do a more in-depth analysis to try to understand what are some of the things that do allow a more sustained impact of these training programs, and should we be targeting different types of training, different types of programs, even within the broader category of training that could produce more long-term outcomes, recognizing that achieving a long-term outcome for many of these populations is going to be an expensive process. Hopefully that helped.
It did. Thank you.
I think your question about sustainability is a really, really important one. Unfortunately, when we're doing this research, data limitations often crop up. We were really fortunate in this study to have access to data through the Kentucky Center for Statistics, which is housed within the Education and Labor Cabinet. For many years, they've been building an infrastructure there that has made studies like this possible. They're constantly working on improving that, and more data across these different types of programs will be really helpful. One of the problems we often run into in evaluating the longer term impacts is that the data just doesn't go far enough back. In this particular data set for adult ed, we were going back to 2014. I can't recall off the top of my head how far back we went in terms of trains. But because of that, we're limited in terms of how long we can observe these individuals. Often we start to lose track of them. It's not necessarily that they're not showing, not that they're not employed. They may not be employed in Kentucky anymore. Once they leave Kentucky, they could be employed, but we would never know that. So we start running into limitations in terms of the actual data structure. Over time, as we build this infrastructure and maintain that infrastructure, we will get better and better in terms of the types of in-depth analysis that we can do. 10 years ago, we probably couldn't have been able to do this for you very easily. But that data infrastructure becomes really, really crucial for answering those long-term questions.
Our last question or comment comes from Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question comes from slide 22. And I think my neighbors as well. The wages among enrollees did not improve, really stuck out to me. So I wondered, is the training considered almost remedial work to get the employee up to being a worthwhile service that they're already being paid for? Help me rationalize wages.
I don't say that's necessarily what's going on. So the 4-credit classes that they're taking can be a number of different things. They can be welding classes. And for years I've heard about a shortage of welders being available. They can be individuals, learning a number of skills that can be quickly adapted to the workforce. Part of the issue I think here is that we're comparing them to their coworkers, and their coworkers are also possibly participating in other types of training. So it's not necessarily that their wages are not growing, it's that their wages are not growing relative to those who are not participating in trains. So you're not seeing, by participating in trains, you're not seeing them improve faster than those who don't participate in trains.
So why would they participate in the trainings?
Well, in this particular case, they're shifting some of the expense for the training to the individual or to the state, so they're able to train more workers. It can be an economic development issue where you're basically lowering those training costs for those individuals, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't receive training in some other type of form.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Could I just, one final
Please.
comment? I want to echo what Mike said about, I have served on a number of federal panels and have been involved in workforce development and data access at a federal level and studied it across the country. I will say in Kentucky, we are unique in having one of the leading, KY Stats is an amazing agency. But I will also say in Kentucky, we are not taking near advantage, the advantage that we should be about the data that they're collecting and could benefit substantially from improved data sharing across all agencies so that we can better coordinate what we're doing. We have a very unique resource here. The folks that have created it and the legislature that created it should be applauded. We just need to start taking advantage of it so that we can continue to evaluate these programs to make sure taxpayers are getting the biggest return on their dollar that they're investing. So I think that one takeaway from this study should be that the great resource we have, and we need to use it more fully.
100% agree with that. I know this summer's legislative conference, KY Stats, was very much in terms of publicizing what we've got here, and you're exactly correct. The work they do is tremendous. I want to thank both of you all for your time. Thank you for your research and your data. Thanks for what you do in the classroom at the University of Kentucky also. Next on our agenda for today, our last item, is building Kentucky's tech talent pipeline. Alicia Sales from We Lead CS, and also Chris Schmidt, Vice President of Technology Products at Fifth Third Bank. And Alicia, I'm not sure if you have anyone else with you today, but if not, you know the routine, not necessarily for this committee, but in others, especially education. But we welcome you today at Economic Development. If you both would introduce yourselves for the record, there's a microphone in front of you. If you'd push the button and you see the green light pop up, that means you're ready to go.
I'd love some. Mr. Chairman, my name is Alicia Sells. I'm the CEO of We Lead CS.
I'm Chris Schmidt. I'm a Director of IT at Fifth Third Bank.
Ready?
Yours.
Chairman Wise, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Like I just said, my name is Alicia Sells, and I'm the CEO of We Lead CS. We Lead CS is a first of its kind in the nation virtual computer science career academy. Created by you and your colleagues in the General Assembly and powered with a $3 million appropriation made in this past session, We Lead CS is carrying out the General Assembly's intent to significantly expand Kentucky students' access to opportunities that prepare them for high-wage, high-demand jobs in Kentucky's tech sector. Kentuckians clearly have opportunities to find work in computer science and in our growing tech economy. In 2023, Kentucky averaged more than 3,400 open computing jobs each month across all regions of the Commonwealth, with an average salary of just over $77,000. Kentucky also has a significant talent gap, a shortage of workers with the education and skills needed to fill those computing jobs. And I'll note that many of those jobs can be done at home, from Louisa to Paducah and all points in between. The talent gap begins in high school. 783 students earned an industry certification in computer science in 2022. That's a low number in and of itself, but consider that 42%, 329 of 783, were in Adobe graphic design and Photoshop software. Graphic design is the most negative growth tech job in Kentucky's tech sector. The gap expands in college. In 23-24, 371 students graduated in Kentucky with computer science associate degrees and 940 with computer science bachelor's degrees. In 2020, the U.S. Department of Education challenged schools to develop ideas for expanding rural students' access to computer science education and preparing them for the exploding number of jobs in all sectors of the economy, requiring workers to have computing and technology skills. The U.S. Department of Ed selected iLead Academy's idea to create a virtual computer science career academy as one of the 5 most innovative ideas in the nation. iLead is a regional career academy in Carrollton, Kentucky, where students from 5 rural districts along the I-71 corridor prepare for the region's highest demand STEM jobs and earn associate degrees in high school. With one computer science teacher providing daily virtual instruction to students in 5 districts, we embarked on a 3-year pilot to test and prove an innovative approach to career education in a virtual world. We developed partnerships with some of America's largest tech employers that are members of the Inter-Alliance of Greater Cincinnati. The Inter-Alliance is a nonprofit coalition of employers who begin building their talent pipeline with students when they're in high school. My colleague Chris Schmidt is going to talk to you more about that in just a moment. We shared what we learned with legislative leaders, and in 2022, the General Assembly passed legislation establishing We Lead CS. In our inaugural year as a statewide program, We Lead CS has 86 students from 8 districts studying computer science with us virtually, from Lawrence, Rockcastle, Carroll, Gallatin, Henry, Owen, and Trumbull counties, and from the Kentucky Education Development Corporation's Virtual Academy for homeschool students. Districts enter into an MOA with We Lead CS to provide computer science instruction for their students. They can enroll as few as 1 student or recruit multiple students from grades 8 through 12. The cost of the district is $500 per student per year. Students get daily instruction, tutoring, and coaching. We provide their industry certifications and pay for their books in KCTCS classes. They can earn 18 to 21 hours of dual credit, transferable to computer science associate and bachelor's degrees in Kentucky's post-secondary institutions. They'll earn industry certifications important to employers, and our innovative work-based learning program that we're delivering virtually will bring employers to students in rural Kentucky, eliminating geographic and cost barriers and moving students to employers in major employment centers. I invite you to join me at a press conference today at 12:30 p.m. in the Rotunda, along with Chairman Wise, House Budget Review Subcommittee on Education Chair Kim Banta, Education Commissioner Robbie Fletcher, and my colleagues from the Inter-Alliance, as we announce 3 ways that We Lead CS is going to meet our challenge from the General Assembly. Chambers of Commerce across the Commonwealth know their businesses better than anyone, so we're asking them to take the lead. We're offering $100,000 in microgrants to Kentucky chambers. We're asking them to identify which Kentucky employers are hiring tech talent, what skills they need in their talent pipeline, and how the chambers can engage those employers with students in We Lead CS. In partnership with We Lead CS, the Inter-Alliance is expanding its model of employer engagement and tech talent pipeline development into Kentucky. 18 years ago, the Inter-Alliance cracked the code on putting high school students to work in tech internships in corporate America. And on October 1st, We Lead CS is launching our student recruitment efforts for the 25-26 school year. Our goal is to add an additional 300 students to the 86 we currently have as we move toward our goal of graduating 250 to 300 students a year who are the most qualified applicants in the entry-level tech talent pipeline. When Chairman Wise invited me to share information with you today about We Lead CS, I knew the aspect of our work most likely to interest you as members of this committee is how the Inter-Alliance can support Kentucky employers and how virtual education and work-based learning works for students in your communities. So I'd like to ask Chris Schmidt with Fifth Third Bank to talk to you some about the Inter-Alliance.
It's my honor to speak in front of the committee today. I'm a lifelong Kentucky resident of Kenton County, a graduate of public schools at Kenton County University, Kentucky, former governor scholar, a current Kentucky colonel. So I'm proud to be here, and thanks for your interest in the topic. I represent an organization called Inter-Alliance. It's a nonprofit. It's a small group. About 18 years ago, the businesses of Cincinnati, the Cincinnati region, including Northern Kentucky, came together and saw a tech shortage there. Similar problems as we've laid out here today for the whole state of Kentucky. Noticing that there's a significant shortfall of tech talent in the area, and what could we do about it? The Inter-Alliance was formed as a partnership between universities, government, and corporations to challenge that and to see where we could get solutions. What we learned over those last 18 years is it requires that partnership. So what we do is several-fold. And I represent this from several different lenses. I'm the co-chair of Inter-Alliance now. I'm a volunteer, so this is unpaid. I'm a parent of a student that went through Inter-Alliance, and then I've represented employers that have worked with talent from Inter-Alliance as internships. what we first try to do and what we realize is important is it's not just an educational problem. You have to inspire these students or expose them to IT careers. So as you go into Henry County or other rural areas of the state, your mother, your aunt, your cousin, your brother has not done an information computer science career. You're not quite sure what those are. I can say that from my own experience being in Kenton County growing up. My mother was a bookkeeper. My father was a maintenance man. I thought I was going to be a bookkeeper until there was a career fair at school where an engineer came up and said, let me tell you what you should do with your math education, your science education, and just pulled out a wad of money and said, this is where to go. This is the future. And I said, well, absolutely, that's what I'm going to do, and fell in love with computer science that day. So I pursued that for myself, and there was a lot of barriers. The education at this high school level wasn't quite there. We had access to computers, but we had transient professors that would come and go. It's tough for the districts to hold on to computer science teachers that can teach with continuity. But going into that exposure was important. Led me into a career education of computer science at the University of Kentucky was vitally important. After that exposure and that incentive that you see there, there's benefit for the employers to pursue this and be part of that, not just getting a trained workforce, but these students deliver. So we provide internships last summer in the greater Cincinnati area, including Northern Kentucky. We had internships for over 125 students at some of the top companies within Cincinnati. This is Procter & Gamble, Fifth Third Bank, Kroger. You can name down the list, and it goes. It's a vast list. I can say personally, from a Fifth Third Bank perspective, we had students come in and they outperform some of our university students. These are high school students trained through these programs. They come through, they deliver. One of our students alone provided $65,000 of annual savings to the company. So this isn't daycare for students. This isn't something that the companies are just doing out of altruistic benefit. We get actual benefit from this. The students are performing. Not only that, we get access to talent we normally wouldn't. So now at Fifth Third Bank, I got access to students that are now going to Purdue, MIT, Cal Berkeley, and they come back. We've got anecdotal stories of students that have come back, that have come through our programs 18 years ago, that have established businesses in the Cincinnati area entrepreneurially. We have one student who was ranked just recently in the Forbes 30 under 30 in the Cincinnati area, who opened a business of additive manufacturing. He got that exposure through our training program, our internship program with General Electric in the Cincinnati area. So we have a model we believe that works. We're excited to be partnered to find how we can help in Kentucky and deliver the same sort of results we've seen in the Cincinnati area.
But Interalliance is really the secret sauce of what we have done to create We Lead CS. I think it's why the U.S. Department of Education picked our idea as one of the 5 most innovative in the nation. I've been involved in public education a long time. It's tough to maintain employer relationships and partnerships. We kind of talk past each other instead of to each other. Lizzie Newell, one of iLead students who is a sophomore at iLead, was supposed to be with us today, and her mom called to say she's running 102-degree temperature, so she can't be here. But I'm really disappointed that she couldn't, because she ended her freshman year with We Lead CS, and our computer science teacher is here, Eric Gray, and his colleague Jenna Gray, who runs our student success programs. And Lizzie worked after her freshman year for P&G this past summer in a paid internship, and it was virtual. And we have worked very closely with P&G to talk to them about creating that virtual internship model for students in rural Kentucky. So Lizzie worked from Owenton, Representative Pratt, and she worked every day for P&G. She was paid to do that. I asked her what her barriers were. I assumed maybe not knowing program languages or not understanding data science. She said her only barrier was not having reliable internet access at home to do that internship. I asked her what she did, and she told me that she worked on data and analytics and her vendor data and GUV training. And I thought, okay, I have no idea what this child just said. She said that GUV stands for Global Ultimate Vendor, and the importance that they have to a global corporation like P&G. So she worked with Dun & Bradstreet Risk Analytics, again, before her sophomore year in high school, so she could search for vendors and better understand P&G suppliers. And Senator Wise, you'll appreciate this. She learned about a cybersecurity program with the FBI, and that is where she has set her sights on her next accomplishment. So I'm sorry, Lizzie couldn't be here today. She's a dynamic young lady, and that's really what We Lead CS and the Inter Alliance are going to bring in partnership with your local chambers as well to students in our rural communities in Kentucky. So, Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for your time today. We appreciate the opportunity to share this with you. Please join us at 12:30 if you'd like to walk over and be a part of the press conference. We will work with staff to make sure that all the members of the House and Senate receive information that you can share with your constituents about these Chamber of Commerce grants that will be available, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
We do have some questions. I first want to thank you all for the presentation. Thanks for the work that both of you all are doing on behalf of the Commonwealth. I do have a question. I'll turn it over also to Senator Wilson, who's going to follow up. You mentioned on your strategies to recruit 300 additional students for that 25-26 school year. Is that more districts you're trying to reach out to, or is that just through those 8 districts that you mentioned?
No, sir, this is open for the next school year to every school district in the state. So we are already out meeting with districts, talking to them about their interest. Jenna Gray, who's our Director of Student Success, is going out and doing recruitment in high schools, lunch and learns during lunch days in high schools and middle schools. We're looking for students from grades 8 through 12. Okay. So we have students that have gotten to their senior year and are really interested in computer science, want to get a little experience. KET did a story this week, talked to one of those students in Lawrence County, and he talked about how he feels like this is going to give him an advantage when he gets to college. He knows more about what he wants to do. He knows a lot of terminology that he didn't know, and we're not even through the first semester yet. So it's open to all districts in the state, and there's information for chambers of commerce that are interested, for districts that are interested at weleadcs.org.
Fantastic. Members, please take note when talking to your superintendents or members of CASA with this. Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Alicia, thank you, and Chris, thank you for being here today. This is definitely something that we have been striving for and looking forward to, and it's something that happens. I remember I guess it's been 10 years ago, probably when I was chairman.
That's right.
I came to OVAC and I came to iLead Academy, and I was just so totally impressed with what you guys were doing there. So it's no surprise to me that you're sitting here talking about this today. It's so innovative and amazing, because it's exactly what we want to see happening, where our students are being connected to actual companies and they are interning and working and learning these things and doing. I mean, it's just amazing to me. It really is amazing.
Thank you.
And so I want to commend you on this work. And again, I agree with the chairman that members take note, talk to your districts about getting kids involved in this, because it's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. You've been a tremendous advocate for us from the very beginning. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Smith, you had mentioned that districts are having difficulty holding on to some of these computer science teachers. Obviously, in order to move the needle, we need the best teachers in place for this to be a success. What can we do to help retain those highly qualified teachers?
I think the answer is the We Lead CS model, is that trying to do that might be futile. If you're getting educated to educate in computer science, you're often tempted to go into industry because of the shortage of jobs. So there's twofold. You're going to find a population of students in these regions that maybe aren't enough to qualify for a full-time faculty person in that district. That's why the virtual model of We Lead CS is what's effective. We've seen districts try, and there's a cyclical nature of that education that happens in the district. Centralizing that into a program like We Lead CS is where the model seems to work.
So, Representative Duvall, if I may, please. The way that we're investing the state's dollars in this is that We Lead CS hires teachers, and we train our teachers. Our teachers are some from industry. So we have one young man who just is a brand new teacher who got a degree in computer science, and so we provide that instruction at a much lower cost than a district can provide it, and we provide that training for the teachers, and we enable districts to offer a career pathway like computer science. We actually offer 2 in computer programming, and then in the networking that's needed to do cybersecurity. And they can do that for one student, or they can do that for as many as they need, and it's a much lower cost for them. So it also addresses this incredible shortage we have of computer science teachers, along with every other teacher that I know you all are aware of. But that's really the innovation behind it, is that we provide that virtual instruction. So it's like the district hiring one of our teachers, but just to provide a class or two.
Last question or comment, Senator Funky Fromeyer.
I personally love the wad of money that inspires the young mind to go one direction or another. I just absolutely think that is a huge recognition of, my freshman in high school says, I don't know, Mom, as a financial advisor, I don't think you make enough money. I'm going to go a different direction. But the direction that you shared, is there a cap on the number of students that may be recruited? You've already got me texting 6 of my superintendents, but I do have 11, so I'll be texting them all. But is this the pathway? Do we start with superintendents, then principals, then teachers and students? You talked about lunch and learns. What's the best way for us to introduce our educators to this?
So, Senator, we feel like our cap for the next school year for 25-26 is 300, added to the 86 we already have. That cap will grow proportionate to the General Assembly's willingness to invest in the program, and I don't foresee that growing exponentially beyond where we are. You appropriated $3 million in this last session. We're investing a lot of that in startup structure at this point, but then also in hiring staff and college and career readiness counselors. So we feel like we can serve around 350 students next year. And the trajectory of that is, I think, as you just described, superintendent, principal, parents, students. The district board has to enter into an MOA with We Lead CS. And so that makes the superintendent a very critical decision maker here. It also is important that the superintendent to provide some leadership. The chief academic officers in districts are also vitally important to this, as are the career and technical education people. Jen and I went to Spencer County last week and met with a team of 10 people from across the district who came in just to brainstorm ideas with us. So we're happy to do that. We have been in touch in your district with the Education Cooperative and their executive committee, and we're going to host an event in Northern Kentucky for superintendents and all of school administrators that are interested to come. And so we'll certainly collaborate with you and any other members when we come to your communities. I think Senator Wheeler is in here. We're getting ready to descend upon Lawrence County here in a couple weeks, and so we'll start to communicate with you all about things like that. So.
Alicia, we did lose a few members to L&O committee that started at
Sure.
10. We'll make sure that they we follow up with them about this opportunity. I cannot thank you enough for the work that you're doing. Chris, thank you also as a Kentuckian for being here and showcasing the work you've done in Inter-Alliance up there in Greater Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky. Any other members? Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you all so much.